Here's how much it cost me to own a Porsche 996 Turbo for 3 years. After having done a video last year about how much my 2002 Mercedes SL55 AMG had cost me to own, and seeing that the video found quite a lot of appreciation, I thought I'd make a few more videos of that nature. I do have detailed records of all the costs associated with owning most of my previous cars, so let me share that information with you. What I however do not have anymore are the actual cars. So for this video I sold the car in 2017. This will be more of a retrospective rather than a review of the car itself. I will start the video by telling the story of how and why I bought a 911 Turbo. If you're only interested in the cost part, then please skip ahead to the time code shown here. Back in 2014, after 5 years of ownership, my VW Phaeton W12 had finally broken me. More on that in a future video. So I needed something to replace the Phaeton with, and at that point I was 30 and never owned a true sports car. Sure, I also had a 91 Mercedes 500 SL at that time, but anyone who's ever driven one of those knows it's more of a cruiser than a sports car. So I figured it was now or never, since I was relatively young and single and therefore I did not need a large car. I also wanted something fast. I wanted something that could do 0 to 100 kph in under 5 seconds. At that time the Alfa Romeo 4C was just about to come out and I was seriously considering leasing one. But it didn't make financial sense, aka I was too broke to afford one. The car was around 80,000 Swiss francs and would easily have cost me 30,000 Swiss francs in depreciation alone over a 2-year period. Also, the 4C could not have been my main car as it is not that comfortable and being rear-wheel drive would not have been great in the winter. I would probably have had to replace the 500 SL as well if I had gotten the 4C. So I started looking for alternatives in the used market that would offer similar performance with a more convenient and overall less expensive package. I was quite amazed when I realized that the Porsche 996 Turbo had fallen within my budget. When I got my driver's license at 18, the 996 was the then current 911 model and the Turbo back then would have cost 220 Swiss francs. And now, as an old and depreciated car, that model was starting at around 30,000 Swiss francs. Yep, that's the number I estimated I would lose in depreciation alone on a new 4C, and I could buy an entire 911 Turbo for that. My reasoning was that even if the 911 was going to have major problems and maintenance nightmares, it would never be worth zero, and therefore I should be able to recoup the most of the purchase price come time to sell it. I had also never seen a Porsche 911 Turbo for less than 30,000 Swiss francs, and I was sure that even the much maligned 996 was underappreciated at that point. Personally, I've always liked the 996 Turbo. It was the Porsche Turbo when I was a kid and I always thought it looked really good. And thanks to the fact that the engine was water-cooled and that the headlines were not perfectly round, I could afford a 911 Turbo. Me, a middle-class 30-year-old in a 911 Turbo? Oh hells yeah! Of course, I spent a lot of time reading the Porsche forums and learning everything I could about that model. And by of course, I mean that if you're a car nerd like me, of course that is the first thing you're going to do when a specific model piques your interest. I was quite pleased to learn that while the regular 996 can have problems with their intermediate shaft bearings which lead to catastrophic engine failures, the turbos do not have these problems and are generally regarded as being very robust. So that was it. I sold my Phaeton and started calling sellers about the 996 turbos for sale. As usual, I only looked at the very bottom of the market. There are 3 reasons for that. First, I usually do not have more budget to spend on purchasing the car. Second, the more expensive cars are not automatically better cars. And third, Negotiating money off of a grossly overpriced car has never really worked for me. You see, I wanted a car I could daily drive and therefore put a lot of kilometers on it, and especially drive it in the winter without feeling bad about it. So for my driving profile, it would have not made any sense getting a pristine low mileage car. Also, I tend to get suspicious when a car has too low mileage. Has the odometer been tampered with? Or why has the car been driven so little? Was it too unreliable to be driven more? Has being driven so little caused problems? Yeah. Anyway, I eventually found a 2001 with 151,000 kilometers on the clock. The seller wanted 32,000 francs for the car. The catch? It was in the Fribourg region of Switzerland, about 2 hours away from me, which is far in Switzerland. And of course, the guy only spoke French. Thankfully, my French was not as rusty as I thought it was, and quickly came back to me as I started talking to the seller on the phone and started asking various things about the car. The guy made a good impression over the phone, so I decided it was worth going to check the car out in person. I'm not one of those persons who take a lot of pictures of their cars, so I don't have that much for you to look at. Luckily, when I sold the car, I made a little sales video that I'm going to recycle now, so you at least get an impression of what the car was like. When I arrived, I basically found my ideal person to buy a used car from. Small business owner who has had the car for more than 5 years. You know, the kind of person who is doing well enough with the means to properly maintain such a car. And a person who has the foresight to plan ahead and so on, you know, like a reasonable person. The car, it had a horrible Alpine flip-out navigation unit. That thing cost something like 8,000 Swiss francs back in the day when it was new, but at the time I was looking at it, it was hopelessly outdated and it was just a horrible, horrible thing. Other than that, the car was clean and it drove well. As I had read the forums previously, I had gotten myself a Durametric OBD cable that allowed me to read out the car's different control modules. This would on the one hand tell me if the mileage was plausible by comparing it against the airbag control module's hours of operation counter, and on the other hand, it could tell me if the car had been abused, as Porsches store their over-revs in the ECU. The good news is that while the car had 151,000 kilometers, it had less than 2,000 hours of operation, giving the car a reassuringly plausible average speed of around 80 kph. If the calculated average speed over the car's life until then had been under 50 kph, it would have been a likely indication that the odometer of the car had been dialed back at some point. However, in this case, the mileage was plausible. As for over-revs, the car had a bunch of them in zone 1, meaning that it had been driven into the rev limiter. Not a big deal, as those over-revs are considered harmless. However, the car also had 2 over-revs in the zone 2. Zone 2 is bad because it means the engine was revved beyond the rev limiter, for example when shifting into 3rd gear instead of 5th gear. This can damage the engine, and for example Porsche would only offer an extended warranty on Porsche 996s with over-revs in zone 2 after doing a thorough inspection of the engine. In my case it was just 2 over-revs in zone 2, that's 2 ignitions. And they were hundreds of hours ago. So if they had caused any damage to the engine, that damage would already have manifested itself by then. So after a bit of negotiation, we shook on 30,000 Swiss francs and I drove the car for the next 3 years, through sunshine, rain and snow. But now let's come to the part you actually care for, the costs of ownership. I bought the car in the beginning of November 2014. So my first purchase was a set of new old stock original 996 turbo winter rims, a new set of Pirelli W240 snow tires and some center caps off eBay for a total of 2,043 francs fitted. I drove through the winter and the next expense did not come up until April. By the way, 911 turbos make for great winter cars. With the engine in the back and four-wheel drive, you get astonishing amounts of traction. Back to topic. In April, I bought a set of new summer tires, since the old ones were worn. The Bridgestone Potenza S-02A cost me 1,067 Swiss francs fitted. In May 2015, the car was due for a large service. Spark plugs were changed, oil and so on. Additionally, brake rotors and pads in the rear were changed, and I also had the radiators in the front cleaned. You know, leaves and dirt tends to get locked in there and then they just rot the radiators out. That service cost me 3,207 francs. But since at that point I obviously had not spent enough money on the car, I decided to finally get rid of that awful Alpine flip-up navigation unit and replace it with a state-of-the-art Pioneer double-din head unit. Installing a new head unit also meant relocating the climate controls and replacing some of the compartments and storage bins in the center console. I bought the bezels and the storage bins from Porsche for a very reasonable 141 francs. That also included a side trim for the center console, which replaced the useless and quite ugly bulky phone console that my car was fitted with originally. I bought a double-din kit from eBay in order to fit a double-din radio, and I also decided to install a backup camera since the car had no parking sensors and was quite hard to see out of. The camera also came from eBay and was just 15 francs, and by the way, it worked great. The Pioneer AVIC F77 DAB was brand new on the market back then, and it cost me a healthy 1,445 francs. All in all, that infotainment upgrade cost me 1,649 francs. Would I do it again? Absolutely. I just need a car to have Bluetooth and to be able to play MP3s. Plus, Pioneer, with its automatic time correction and EQ features, managed to improve the sound quality of the factory sound system quite a bit. It was a lot of work since I had to tear a good part of the interior apart to route the cables for the backup camera and to get rid of that old Alpine unit, which was subdivided into 3 separate units and like 2 in the front and 1 in the back and cable everywhere. Yeah. Of course, there was also that moment when I had reassembled everything and the car would not start, and in the instrument cluster there was the message, "Instrument cluster defective." Why? Turns out the battery had gotten flat during the install, even though it was disconnected, but more on that later. And then when I had taken out the instrument cluster to install the microphone in the factory location, since factory location in 996 is actually in the instrument cluster, I had not plugged a plug all the way back in, so no big deal. However, on a positive note, I was actually quite surprised when under the center tunnel I found about 20 5-franc coins. So $100 free money, yay! If I want to be really pedantic, I therefore have to subtract 100 francs from the total cost of this install. But back to actual maintenance. In June, I was coming off the motorway, wanted to downshift and realized the clutch pedal was hard as a rock. At the same time, the power steering started making some nasty noises. I had obviously lost the hydraulics that assist with those two systems. Luckily, that just happened about 2 kilometers from my mechanic's place, so I managed to carefully drive the car back there and then walk the 15 minutes to my mom's house where I keep my other car. It was a failed reservoir for the hydraulics. Actually, it was just a failed O-ring of that reservoir, but since these reservoirs tend to age and to fail after a certain number of years, I had the whole unit replaced at the cost of 444 francs. A month later, my battery went completely dead. By lucky coincidence, I had just bought one of those small boosters in a sale a week prior. Without that little thing, I would have been stranded. New battery was 199 Swiss francs. In October, I had the winter wheels balanced and put back on. That was a surprisingly expensive 125 francs. In April, I had the summer wheels put back on, another 125 francs. I do my wheel changes myself now. In May, a number plate light went out. I replaced both lights with LEDs from eBay for 23 francs. And then a trunk light went out and I replaced both the trunk light and the hood lights with LEDs. Yes, the 996 also has an illuminated engine bay. Anyway, those two lights were 10 francs from AliExpress. In June 2017, I did another service. This time, I had the spark plugs and also the ignition coils replaced. Ignition coils are basically consumables on 996 turbos, and it is considered best practice to replace them with every second spark plug change. I also had the oil pressure sender unit replaced, as the car would sometimes show no oil pressure at all. Altogether, that service cost me 2,349 francs. And that is all I spent in repairs, maintenance or upgrades on the car during my ownership. That is 11,142 francs over the period of almost 3 years. Almost, it's 32 months. But that is of course not all. I spent 6,908 francs on fuel, 4,406 liters with an average fuel consumption of 11.92 liters in 100 kilometers, and 1 franc 57 cents per liter. Insurance was 4,027 francs and taxes were 150 francs. And that's because I have two cars on one number plate and I only have to pay the taxes for the more expensive one. It's just 50 francs a year to have the second car registered. In my case, my other cars, the 500 SL and later the SL55 AMG, had larger displacement engines and were heavier, and therefore they were the cars I had to pay the tax for. If I did not have another car, the road tax for the 911 Turbo would have been 818 francs per year, or 2,318 francs for my entire ownership. So, here we have another 11,085 francs. But no calculation of total cost of ownership would be complete without taking into account the resale of the car. And in this regard, I was right. Not only did the car not lose much value, I actually managed to sell it for more than I originally bought it for. The car sold for 33,000 Swiss francs. That leaves us with a total cost of ownership of 19,227 francs. That is 6,786 francs per year or 51 cents per kilometer, which is actually not bad. I reckon this might be the most economical car I have ever owned. I know it's less than my SL55 AMG cost me and way less than my VW Phaeton W12 cost. I really need to make a video about that car, especially now that the wounds have healed. Of course, this says more about me and my choices in cars than about the car itself. But for a sports car of the caliber of a Porsche 911 Turbo, 51 cents per kilometer is actually quite decent, especially compared to some alternatives. If we go back to my original intention of getting an Alpha 4C, that car would have been 80,000 francs back then, and 3 years later I would have been lucky to sell it for 50,000 francs. 30,000 francs in depreciation alone. And then there is fuel, there's insurance, there's other stuff. So all in all, I was very pleased with my time owning the Porsche 911. The car was pretty reliable, especially considering the high mileage and the age. And of course, it was also great fun to drive. Of course, not everything was great. Due to the car being so low, I had people back into the front of the car on parking lots on 3 separate times. Since the second time happened before I could get the bumper repaired from the first time, I did actually not bother to have it repaired at all, which turned out to be the right decision because somebody bumped into it again. Then again, that's hardly the car's fault. I just wished I had caught one of those motherfuckers in the act. But back to topic. This was just my experience with the car. That's just a single account. This is not meant to make generalizing statements about this car model. It's just my experiences. And I mean, I have records showing that the previous owner had spent almost 17,000 francs in the 3.5 years before selling the car to me. For example, he had a rotten radiator replaced for 2,000 francs. And more importantly, he also had a defective turbo replaced at the cost of 6,500 francs. For me, it was a great experience, especially since it did not ruin me financially, but maybe I just got lucky. But I mean, if I was so happy with the car, why did I ultimately end up selling it? Well, you see, I had the chance to spend some time with a Nissan GT-R. I made a Swiss-German review back in the day, and after driving that car, there was just no going back. But that is a story for another day. I'm done. This video is already way too long. What do you think? Is a Porsche 996 Turbo still a smart buy today? If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments box down below. Also, subscribe to my channel and like this video if you're interested in me making more such videos in the future. But that is all. So long and thanks for watching.